Okay, welcome back. We're going to carry on with our Scratch projects. So we should have our sprite, which continuously opens and closes his mouth as the game runs. We should have our backdrop with our walls, and we should have our sprite, which is also pointing in all four directions based on the keys we press. And our sprite is always moving two steps or how many other steps that you've chosen, as long as his nose is touching the background. Um, so we'll very quickly test that out and see exactly how our game should be working. And so, yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention is we should also have our sprite that also, whenever we start the game, goes on to the same starting point facing a certain direction. Now, we need to make our game a little bit more interesting because it's not so interesting with our Pac-Man just moving around the screen, doing nothing. So we are now going to introduce some fruit. We're going to allow our Pac-Man to get some points. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and draw our fruit. So I'm going to choose a sprite. And instead of choosing a sprite to use, I'm going to click on paint. So I'm going to paint a sprite. This sprite will be a piece of food. Let's use a piece of fruit. It's up to you what you want to use. You may want to use, use a circle. Let's get the color orange. There we go. And I can add a green dot. And there's my orange. What I can also do, if I wanted to choose a different fruit, I can simply use a darker red circle. And remember, we need to try and get this. I just copied and pasted that there. The middle of my sprite should be where that center target was. Now let's paint some green stems. Let's get a thicker. There we go. A couple of cherries there. Let's try. It's up to you, whichever fruit you want to do. I'm going to use the cherry. Obviously, I've drawn my cherry. I'm going to head back. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. Do you guys remember how I'm going to make that smaller? I'm going to head down to the size and make that smaller. Let's try 40. Okay, so I've got my sprite there, which is size 40. Obviously, you can draw whichever sprite you want, whichever fruit you want, and make it the relevant size. So if you guys want to head over and do that for me. Once you're done with that, we are now going to code it. So let's think about exactly how I'm going to code this. So as soon as my green flag is clicked, my game starts. What should I do? I'm going to head over to events when my green flag is clicked. Let's zoom into that a little bit. Exactly what do I want my sprite to do? We'll get it to start from a certain point. So always go to these coordinates, which in my case will be minus 81 and 131. So let's say go to there. Okay. And now what is that piece of fruit going to do? I'm going to call him a he, but obviously it's not necessarily a he. But my cherry will simply wait until, and once he's actually waiting. So what is he waiting for? Let's think about it. He's actually waiting for my Pac-Man to come and eat him. So I'm going to head down to sensing. We can use this one here, touching. Let's scroll down and use sprite 1. Wait until you're touching sprite 1. And when you are touching sprite 1, what do we want to do? We want to add 1. We want to add to the score. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to add something called a variable. You guys may remember we looked at variables last year as well. Variables are something in my game that will change constantly. Okay, I can refer to it as one thing. So if I was referring to you with your name, my variable in that case would be name. And every time I go through the register, I will say the next person's name who's on the register. If I'm writing a letter to everyone, the same letter, I may say dear name, and the name would automatically be whoever's name that letter is going out to. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to imagine we have a cup. Now, this cup, imagine every time you eat the cherry, you throw the cherry in the cup. As soon as we start the game, what happens with the cup? We empty it out. There should be 0 cherries inside there. Every time we eat the cherry, we throw the cherry inside the cup. And once you've hit, let's say, the game is finished, we look at exactly how many cherries are in there. There's 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it to 0 when we start the game, and every time it's eaten, we're going to add 1 to that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to head over to the variables block. We're going to create a variable. So make a variable. What should we call this? Call this variable. This variable is a score. Let's call it score. So I've got my score. And I need to think. Like we said earlier on, as soon as we start the game, it should be 0. So exactly which block am I going to use here for that? It is set my variable to 0. So as soon as my green flag is clicked, let's set my score to 0. And every time he touches the sprite, what will we do? We are going to change my change my score by 1. So let's test that out now. Okay, so the score went up, okay, but it didn't do anything else after that. There's a few things we need to do. We need to think about exactly why did nothing happen to this to the cherry. The score changed, but what else do we want to happen to the cherry? Ideally, we would get it to hide, go somewhere else, and then reappear. Okay, let's go and get that coded for now, and then we will come back and we will continue with that shortly. Okay, so some of you may have figured out exactly how to get my character to hide or my sprite to hide. That will actually be in looks. I will get my sprite to hide as well. Okay, now let's test that out again. Once I click on go, what should happen to my score? It should set to 0. And when I eat the cherry, the score should change by 1, and the cherry should hide as well. There we go. That worked, so that's fine. Perfect. Now what do we want him to do? Or what do we want the cherry to do? We want it to actually go to somewhere random and then show again. So what we're going to do, head over to motion, go to a random position, and show. Okay, let's try that again. So we have a problem there. So as soon as I start my game, my cherry does not show. So I'm going to grab that piece of code. I'm going to say, put that as soon as my green flag is clicked, it will show. There we go. And did that go to a random position? Yes, let's test that out again. Oh, not hiding anymore. So we need to think about exactly what happened here. Did that work perfectly the first time around? Yes, it did. As soon as my green flag is clicked, my cherry shows. The score is set to a particular score, set to 0. Goes to a random position, waits until he touches the sprite. The score goes up by 1. He hides, goes to a random position, and then shows again. If you guys can get that coded for me and then come back, we'll carry on and see exactly what else we're going to do to improve on that piece of code. Now, it worked the first time. It went to somewhere random. That did not happen again. Do we want the same thing to happen again? Yes, we do. Okay, so we're going to think exactly how we are going to get that coded. It's very simple. All we are going to use is some iteration. You guys should remember what iteration was. It was when we get something to repeat itself. So if we head over to control, we have 3 types of iteration. We have the repeat certain number of times. We have the repeat until, and we have the forever. So which one of those would we use? We don't want it to happen a certain number of times because then that will limit the number of fruits we can have in our game. If that's what you want to do, that's up to you. That's fine. That will work. We can use a repeat until, but what will it repeat until? Until what point? And we can use a forever for it to simply happen constantly. I'm going to use a forever for now. Okay, and what I've done is I've basically put the forever around those blocks of code so that will constantly happen. Later on, we're going to use the repeat until option, but we're going to use a forever for now. So let's test that out. 0 went somewhere random. Let's test that out. Did that work? That worked perfectly. However, we've got another issue. We're going to fix that later on. If you want to improve on your code and get it to that stage for me for now, and then we will come back and see if we can get our cherries out of the wall. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is think about exactly when will my game end. The cherry, we're going to get that out of the wall later on. That's not a problem. We're going to think about when will my game end. We are going to add a timer. Now, we've added a timer in the past when we done a similar game. Well, it's much smaller game last year. So let's think about how we're going to do this. Where will we code it? Think about it. If we're going to have multiple fruits, we do not want to code it on our fruit. Otherwise, our timer will go down by 2 seconds or 3 seconds, depending on how many fruits we have. We do not want that. We want it to go down once. I only have one sprite, so I can actually code it in my sprite, or I can code it in my backdrop. Let's code it in the sprite for now. So for the timer, we are going to add another variable. What would be a good name for the variable? We can call it time. Time left, time to go, timer, time. It's up to you. Okay, so I've got my time there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck these variables inside the wall actually, so it does not really come into the way of the game. So I have my variable called time. I'm going to now incorporate that into my code. What do I want to happen as soon as my green flag is clicked? Or when do I want my timer to start? I gave it away there. It was when my green flag is clicked. So I'm going to head over to events and say when my green flag is clicked. Similar to what we've done to the score. When my score was set to 0, I'm going to get my time to set to another random, not a random number, but however long I want my character to have. So I'm going to say set my time. We're going to test this out only, so we're going to use 10 seconds and make sure that works. Now, if you guys can remember, how did we have our time constantly go down until we got to 0? If you guys remember, that's where we used the repeat until. So let's head over back to control, repeat until, and we're going to head back to operators until something is equals to something else. Repeat until our time is equal to 0. So repeat until time is equal to 0. What do I want to do? How will I get my time to go down? I will use the change my time by 1. Let's test that out. Let's see if that works. Oh, what's happening to my time? Okay, it's going up a little bit too fast and it's going up rather than down. So I'm going to I'm going to change that to -1. And I'm also going to add from the control a wait 1 second. Now, it does make a difference if we put that before or after. Think about it. Where will we put it? Before or after? It will actually be before that. Okay, so it's set to 10, wait a second, and then go down by -1. And that will continuously happen until we get to 0. There we go. Okay, so my timer is working beautifully now. Okay, so I'll let you guys go ahead and code your timer as well. And then you can come back and carry on. Okay, so now that we've got our fruit, which works really well, ideally what we do is we perfect our fruit the first time, and then what we can do is we can duplicate it again and again and again. Now, what I want you guys to do is see if you can think about how you would code your cherry to not go back into the wall. Think about it. Okay, whenever we're constantly telling it to go to a random position, how can we think about getting it to stay outside of the wall? Okay, so it's not very difficult. You need to think about it in your head. Exactly what would you do? You're saying if it's inside the wall or if it's touching the orange color, then what do I want you to do? I want you to go back to somewhere which is random. So think about how you can code that. We can take a look at that next week as well. Once you're done, you can submit your work, please, and I'll take a look at that and get you some feedback.